Alrighty, welcome back to Practice Security. My name is Matt Johnston, and I greatly appreciate you joining me as always for another episode. This is going to be a little bit of a different one for us. We are going to walk through together an interview by Ross Douthat from Interesting Times, part of his Interesting Times series. He's a journalist covering a lot of topics today, largely around technology and largely around the topic of artificial intelligence. And he recently did a very interesting interview with the CEO of Anthropic. Excuse me. They're the makers of Claude, Mr. Dario Amodei, and we're going to listen to that interview. We're actually going to listen to it together real time, and I'm going to be pausing the interview at different parts to explain kind of what's going on from a deeper worldview. We're going to talk about this through a Christian lens to help you understand a bit of the theology of what's going on behind the scenes, and also to relate this to the overall AI revolution. There's a lot to glean from this conversation. It's very important to listen to. Listen to the words of the men who were actually in the revolution, who are driving this revolution, to hear what their worldview is, what they have to say, what their perspective on technology is, and where, of course, they're leading us. So that's what we're going to do together. If you're not familiar with the Interesting Times series, I recommend you go back and listen to all of them that are related to AI. Mr. Douthat has done some very interesting conversations with several different personalities around the topic, and it's all very informative. I think the best thing that I can tell you to do in the context of learning about AI and the AI revolution is to listen to the revolutionaries themselves. Now, there's danger there because they are telling you a story. They are telling you a very dangerous story to a large extent, and it does require some interpretation to really know what's going on. In fact, a lot of this story is a perversion of the technology. It is a gross misuse of the technology. And I've written some articles to help you understand where this technology came from, what it's designed for, and we'll talk a little bit about that in this particular interview because it does come up right at the outset. And so it's important for you to listen to the words of these men, first of all, and then to also understand what they mean. And that's what I'm going to try to walk you through in this as we go through this live play-by-play. So without further ado, let's do it. And I'm going to pause as we work through this and explain for you a few of the things that are going on that I want you to really focus on. So here we go.
Here. So you are, rather unusually, maybe for a tech CEO, an essayist. You have written 2 long, very interesting essays about the promise and the peril of artificial intelligence. And we're going to talk about the perils in this conversation, but I thought it would be...
Quick note right away. What's notable about that is if you listen to the other CEOs in the AI revolution, their vision for the future is all utopia. And so Mr. Amodei is positioning himself at the outset of trying to come across as more conservative. He's trying to come across as perhaps more moderate in the overall conversation. He's being presented to us, right at the outset as trying to appeal to our sense of concern. Like he's trying to say, I've got some concerns too. I'm on your side. Let's explore what those concerns are, and we'll walk through them. So right away, we start this interview out with this kind of positioning that this guy is on our side, that he has concerns too, and he's kind of the voice of wisdom and the sole voice of reason in this entire debate. That's kind of how he's positioning himself here, and it's important to discern that. Here we go.
Be good to start with the promise and with the optimistic vision, indeed, I would say the utopian vision that you laid out a couple of years ago in an essay entitled Machines of Loving Grace, which we'll come back to that title, I think, at the end. But, I think a lot of people encounter AI news through headlines predicting, a bloodbath for white-collar jobs, these kinds of things. Sometimes your own quotes have
my own quotes, yes,
have encouraged these things. And I think there's a commonplace sense of what is AI for?
There it is, right away, the common sense. So they're trying to appeal to the fact that there is common sense here, and let's talk about what is common sense. So they're trying to define what is the reasonable conversation to have in AI. At least that's how Amodei is positioning himself. Is he's trying to position himself as the reasonable voice in this conversation, common sense. Let's see what common sense means in the context of the AI revolution
that people have. So why don't you answer that question to start out? If everything goes amazingly in the next 5 or 10 years. What's AI for?
Yeah. So, I think for a little background, before I worked in AI, before I worked in tech at all, I was a biologist. I first worked on computational neuroscience, and then I worked at Stanford Medical School on finding protein biomarkers for cancer, on trying to improve diagnostics and curing cancer. And one of the observations that I most had when I worked in that field was the incredible complexity of it. Each protein has a level localized within each cell. It's not enough to measure the level within the body, the level within each cell. You have to measure the level in a particular part of the cell and the other proteins that it's interacting with or complexing with. And I had this sense of, man, this is too complicated for humans.
Boom, right there. All right, this is super important. Right at the outset, we see Mr. Amodei is one of the transhumanists, one of those who is coming to the technology from outside of a biblical worldview. So what's really interesting right here at the outset is he's talking about, as a biologist, as he's examining the cellular structure of humanity, he's observing that this is incredibly complex, and he's trying to solve problems of medicine, trying to figure out how to participate in curing diseases and treating cancers, and trying to overcome that human problem of sickness and death that we just can't seem to get over. And he's observing that, wow, the human body is so incredibly complex. And then he ends with that line that this is more complex. This problem is so complex, humans can't solve it. Yes, Mr. Amodei, that is true. This is biblical truth. And so interjecting our biblical worldview on this is super important right away. So he's looking at this from the perspective of a biologist absent from God. He's looking at this from the perspective of, I'm just examining tissue and I see it incredibly complex, but I'm going to figure out and solve this complexity. But it's beyond our human ability to solve the complexity of to understand the complexity of humans, the makeup and composure of humans. And so therefore it's so complex, we can't solve illnesses. We can't solve sickness and death and solve all diseases, which is going to come up later in this conversation. He does go to that. He does believe that artificial intelligence, the use of artificial intelligence, will lead to the curing of all diseases, which is a big part of the transhumanist agenda and their promise to the world in terms of what they believe is going to be the value of this revolution. But it's important to recognize this right out the gate, because what do we know theologically as true about what he has just said? Yes, humans are created in the image of God. God, our creator, created us, and we are incredibly complex beings because we reflect an incredibly amazing and creative God. That is part of our nature. And yes, we are so complex. We don't totally understand, and we can't totally measure with human instruments the nature and complexity of who we are. This is true. This is biblically true. And above and beyond that, we know that we will not be able to conquer sickness and death. This is too complex of a problem for us. It is too big of a problem for us. We cannot overcome sickness and death. Why? Because that is the consequence of sin. Sin entered the world and broke and corrupted everything. And so therefore our bodies are subjected to the influences of sin, which is corruption, sickness, disease, and ultimately death. This is the nature of the way that God designed the world to function. For us to say that we can solve our way out of the problem of sickness and death is to say that we can transcend beyond the human state that God gave us. It is to step out of the hierarchy of truth that God has established for us as human beings, and to say we can conquer this. Now, the danger there, of course, is we are putting ourselves in the place of God. Jesus, the part of what's amazing about the cross is that he and the miracles that he performed while he was here on earth, healing the sick and restoring sight to the blind and bringing people back from the dead. The reason those were miracles is because they are beyond the capacity of human beings. It was Jesus demonstrating mastery of things beyond what we can control and conquer on our own. Because if we could conquer sickness and death, then we would be able to undo the curse of sin back from the Garden of Eden, and then we would no longer need Christ to be our Redeemer, to be restored with God. That this is part of the false ideology, the false worldview, and the lie and the deception of the AI revolution. It is fundamentally at the outset counter Christianity. It is against Christianity. It's not against Christianity from the perspective of it's trying to say Christianity is wrong. It is against it from the perspective of saying we're going to ignore Christianity and rediscover all things on our own, and finally with this power conquer the human condition and transcend the state of fallen humanity and achieve some higher state of being. This is right away what Amodei talks about is his core vision for why he engaged artificial intelligence as a technology, coming to this from the perspective of a biologist who observed that human complexity is too difficult to solve as humans. This is a machine problem. We need more sophisticated machines to solve our complexity problem. So it's right away elevating machines in the place of God. And then this is all in service to developing cures to treat all of our diseases and to conquer sickness and death, which is the role that Christ plays for us. All right, let's continue on.
We're making progress on all these problems of biology and medicine, but we're making progress relatively slowly. And so what drew me to the field of AI was this idea that, could we make progress more quickly? Look, we've been trying to apply AI and machine learning techniques to biology for a long time. Typically, they've been for analyzing data. But as AI gets really powerful, I think we should actually think about it differently. We should think of AI as doing the job of the biologist, right? Doing the whole thing from end to end. And part of that involves...
Okay, pause there. Another really important part about the transhumanist worldview. So here he says that, and he acknowledges, this is something that I wrote about in several of my articles to help you understand the nature and the history of artificial intelligence, but help you understand the unethical nature of the AI revolution. I wrote about this in the ethics framework for AI article that I wrote, but I also wrote about this in several other pieces. But right here, what he's saying is he wants the technology. He wants to take a technology that was originally built for information processing, which I fully agree with. That's absolutely what artificial intelligence was built for, information processing. It goes back to the theories of computer technology going all the way back to the 1940s. Of late, the entire data analytics world has been built around the problem of trying to gain visibility into the online digital spaces. As we moved things into the online world out of the physical world, we lost visibility. And so we had to build systems that could give us that visibility again, which is just all about it processing information, digitized information in order to see what's going on in the digital spaces amongst all of our technology. That's the design purpose of artificial intelligence, the technology that upon which AI was built. And he acknowledges that here, which is really, really important, because when we talk about the ethics of tools and the ethics of any technology, we need to think about what's the original design purpose for this tool. What is the good and right use of this tool? Well, it is in relation to its design purpose, its design nature. And so if artificial intelligence was designed for information processing, to look at complex sets of data and to make sense of them, then that is the right, good, and true use of the technology. And any other use of the technology is to bend its purpose. It is to use its purpose in the wrong context, in a different foreign context. And that leads to all sorts of misuses and all sorts of harms. As I wrote about in my ethics piece, I talked about the idea of a shovel. Right, shovel is a tool that is built for a particular purpose. You use it in a particular way to those particular right and good ends, and that is what is good and right about a shovel. You can use a shovel for lots of other things, but when you use it improperly, or when you use it for things it wasn't designed for, that's when you run into problems. You run into inefficiencies. You run into harm to yourself or to others. You run into all sorts of problems when you misuse tools. And right away, what he's saying is we have a tool, it's designed for a thing. And we look at that and say, okay, it is well and good, but we're not satisfied with that. We want to use this tool to do other things. And so we're going to repurpose this tool now to try to solve cancer. And not only that, he says, we're going to repurpose this tool that was designed for information processing to do the job of the biologist end to end. He says that this tool, it should be repurposed to replace people. It should be repurposed to do whatever it is the biologist naturally does. Now, what are the problems with that? Well, besides the fact that it is misusing the tool, it is a fundamental misuse, and therefore I would say an abuse of the technology, unethical use of the technology. It is also ruining the person. this guy was a biologist once upon a time. He was passionate about biology. He's created by God to be interested in these things, and with a mind that focuses on these things, and with a passion and calling towards pursuing this in life. This is what gave his life meaning, was the pursuit of biology and analytics around biology towards the service of helping improve the quality of life of mankind through medicine. This is what his purpose was in life, and his mission and meaning in life was. This is how God created him to be. And what he's proposing is, let's take this technology and replace those people who are drawn towards biology, who are created by God to be drawn to this and have the natural skills, abilities, and talents to apply themselves to this space. And then they get meaning and value in life and purpose in life through that pursuit. He's saying, no, we should replace those people with the technology so that we can go faster and transcend these problems of humanity. So again, talking about hierarchy of values and the meaning of people and the potential damage and ramifications of artificial intelligence, right away we can see how this is a technology that is being repurposed to cause people harm. And this is what it's interesting that he talks about, the potential for job loss. Right at the beginning of this conversation, he says this tool is a tool for creating job loss. But what does that actually mean? It means ruining the purpose and the mission and the identity of individuals who are applying themselves through their jobs. Jobs have meaning. It's not just something we do for money. It is an extension of who we are. And right away, he's positioning the technology as being misused. The AI revolution is a misuse of the technology. It is a misapplication of the technology toward impossible ends that are counter to Christian worldview and theology. And it is in so doing, it is destroying the meaning, purpose, and vision and value of individuals by replacing them with this technology. It's a replacement of mankind with technology. He says it right at the beginning, which is just incredible. This is transhumanism, which is why it's so dangerous. All right, let's keep going.
Proposing experiments, coming up with new techniques. I have this section where I say, look, a lot of the progress in biology has been driven by this relatively small number of insights that lets us measure or get at or intervene in the stuff that's really small. You look at a lot of these techniques, they're invented very much as a matter of serendipity, right? CRISPR, which is, one of these gene editing technologies, was invented because someone went to a lecture on the bacterial immune system and connected that to the work they were doing on gene therapy. And that connection could have been made 30 years ago. And so the thought is, could AI accelerate all of this? And could we really cure cancer? Could we really cure Alzheimer's disease? Could we really cure, heart disease? And, more subtly, some of the more psychological afflictions that people have, depression, bipolar, could we do something about these
We no longer need Jesus. We no longer need the saving, redeeming power of Christ working within us and solving these psychological and physical problems, or pursuing what is the meaning of these things in our life as we suffer through some of these things towards being drawn closer to God. No. We don't want to deal with that anymore. This is a problem. All these issues are a problem for us to overcome by our own effort and our own meaning. This is the original sin in the Garden of Eden. This was the lie that Eve was tempted with by the serpent. You can be like God. You can recreate yourself in your own image. You can transcend into a higher state of being like God if you will just give yourself over to this. This is exactly the issue that Amodei is dealing with, and he's choosing to follow the snake.
Extent that they're biologically based, which, I think they are, at least in part. So, I go through this argument here. Well, how fast could it go, right? If we have these intelligences out there who could do just about anything.
And I want to pause you there, because one of the interesting things about your framing in that essay, and you've sort of returned to it, is that these intelligences don't have to be, right, the kind of maximal godlike superintelligence that comes up in AI debates. You're basically saying if we can achieve a strong intelligence at the level of sort of peak human performance, and then multiply it.
Okay, so careful point here. They are talking about making AI godlike. They're just saying right here what the subtlety that Douthat is saying is there are some people that say we should build a super AI thing, like one AI thing that has all the power and controls everything, all things consolidated to that one thing. This is largely what Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Sam Altman are proposing, and even what the Trump administration is proposing through Project Genesis. It is to create an AI, a God that controls everything, kind of like deep thought from I forget the name of the model of the book series. Anyway, you get the point. To create one super godlike power that will control all things. And Amodei is saying, not that. I want to create a whole bunch of gods. I want to create a god all over the place, kind of like everyone's household idol, everyone's household shrine that is the god of each of these subtle small domains. So while they're saying don't create a god-like superpower, that they are saying that. They're just saying not one to rule everything. They're saying one god for everything. So lots and lots of gods. All right, let's keep going.
Right. To what your phrase is, a country of geniuses.
A country have 100 million of them.
Right. 100 million.
Each a little trained a little different, or trying a different problem.
Lots of gods.
There's benefit in diversification and trying things a little differently. But yes.
Right. So you don't have to have.
Reminds me of Greece when Paul walks through, I think it was Ephesus, was it? And he's encountering all the gods, a god to this and a god to that and a god to this. Yes, this is that.
Of the full machine god. You just need to have 100 million geniuses.
You don't have to have the full machine god. And indeed, there are places where I can't.
You don't need one god. You need lots and lots of them.
Cast doubt on whether the machine god, would be that much more effective at these things than the 100 million geniuses, right? I have this concept called, the diminishing returns to intelligence, right? Which is, there's economists talk about, the marginal productivity of land and labor. We've never thought about the marginal productivity of intelligence. But if I look at some of these problems in biology, like at some level, you just have to interact with the world. At some level, you just have to try things. Just have to comply with laws or change the laws on getting medicines through the regulatory system. So there's a finite rate.
Change the laws of getting medicines through the regulatory system. Well, that's interesting.
At which these changes can happen. Now, there are some domains, like if you're playing chess or Go, where the intelligence ceiling is extremely high. But I think the real world has a lot of limiters. So maybe you can go above the genius level, but sometimes I think all this discussion of could you use a moon of computation to make an AI god, are they're a little bit sensationalistic and kind of besides the point. Even
Okay, so getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, this is an interesting point he's making here. So lots and lots of little gods to do lots and lots of little things, each in their own little context. But he's talking about using those to break through barriers in each of those contexts. And he dropped a little hint there. What about changing the laws for getting medicines available for common use? He's talking about using AI to transform so much of our reality and life that it will have an effect in everything, a redefinition of all things. This is another really important piece to understand. I try to explain this in the article I wrote that's titled 100% Unemployment. The title is a little sensationalized, and I did that on purpose. But what I try to illuminate to you in that article was the fact that if we follow this process through, this revolution through, it is a radical transformation of everything, of politics, of culture, of the way of doing things, of our ethic, of our worldview, of religion. It is a radical transformation of all things. And he just dropped that very subtly through what he just said. But he's going to talk about that some more.
Even as I think this will be the biggest thing that ever happened to humanity.
Right. So keeping it concrete, you have a world where there's just an end to cancer as a serious threat to human life, an end to heart disease, an end to most of the illnesses that we experience that kill us, possible life extension beyond that. So that's health. That's a pretty positive vision. Yeah. Then talk about economics and wealth. What happens in the 5 to 10 year AI takeoff to wealth?
Yeah. So again, let's keep it on the positive side.
Yes,
there'll be plenty. We'll get to the negative side. But we're already working with pharma companies. We're already working with financial industry companies. We're already working with, folks who do manufacturing. We're, of course, I think especially known for coding and software engineering. So just the raw productivity, the ability to like make stuff and get stuff done, that is very powerful. And, we see our company's revenue going up 10x a year. And, we suspect the wider industry looks something similar to that. If the technology keeps improving, it doesn't take that many more 10x's until, suddenly you're saying, if you're adding across the industry $1 trillion of revenue a year, like, the US GDP is 20 or 30 trillion. I can't remember exactly. So you must be increasing the GDP growth by a few percent. So
no. He's got this totally wrong. I don't understand why he can't see this. It's really crazy to me when brilliant people just can't see. No question, this dude is brilliant. From an intellectual perspective. He talked about his company is seeing 10x growth in revenue. So again, we talked about this in a different article. That's not because he's generating new revenue. It's not because he's generating that he's not enabling businesses to generate new products or new revenue. In fact, a lot of the businesses that have switched over to AI are reporting lots and lots of problems. They're not seeing tremendous growth. The economy is not currently growing. What he's talking about in this 10x growth in his own business is this massive transfer of wealth. Investors are taking their money out of other businesses and they are investing them heavily in the artificial intelligence companies like Anthropic because they believe that this is the future. So this transfer of wealth, the fact that he's saying, we're using AI and our business revenue is growing 10x, that's because we're seeing this massive transfer of property out of the economy and out of the natural places where it's dispersed and into AI. This is the bubble that we're seeing in the tech industry. I have an article and a video about this. If you look at the top market valuation of companies, compare that from 2023 to 2025, you'll see that the entire market value has shifted in a huge way into these AI companies. Now, is that translating over into the rest of the economy? Not so far. Businesses are reporting that their adoption of AI is causing friction in the business, and it's not dramatically increasing GDP and individual wealth. Another data point to consider: personal income and debt is down. The job market is struggling right now. Right now, I saw a metric I think it was yesterday, about how white collar workers are taking up to 6 months to find work. They're staying unemployed for 6 months at a time, trying to find work. And then as we're laying people off in the name of AI, or as he just mentioned a few minutes ago, replacing biologists with machines, those people no longer have income, which means they no longer have money to spend, which means they won't be able to buy all these whiz-bang features that the AI companies are producing. See, this is part of the big mythology. If you play this forward, it just doesn't work. And so when he's saying like, we're going to generate all this wealth, how, for who? Who's going to be buying the things that AI is producing? This transfer of wealth and this GDP percentage increase he's talking about is because all this money is being poured into his company. It's making it bigger and bigger and bigger. But the rest of the economy is suffering. Personal debt is at the all-time high. Credit cards are high. Unemployment is high. Inflation's high. The dollar is down. So this AI revolution is a transfer of wealth, not the generation of wealth. This is another one of the big myths, and I don't understand why they don't see that.
I can see a world where AI brings the developed world GDP growth to something like 10 or 15%. 5, 10, 15. I mean,
how? Who's going to buy anything?
There's no science to calculating these numbers. It's a totally unprecedented thing. But it could bring it to numbers that are outside the distribution of what we saw before. And again, I think this will lead to a weird world, right? We have all these debates about the deficit is growing. If you have that much in GDP growth, you're going to have that much in tax receipts, and you're going to balance the budget without meaning to. But
okay, where does tax receipts? What is tax receipts? That is usually business taxes or income taxes. Usually business taxes or income taxes. Okay, if we're laying people off and making their jobs run by AI, then how will people have what income will they be generating that is taxable by the government that's going to increase or shrink this deficit spending gap? Same with businesses. Okay, so Anthropic is now worth billions of dollars. NVIDIA went from being worth like $350 million a few years ago to now being worth $4 trillion. Or maybe it's $350 billion and now $4 trillion. Okay, that was a transfer of wealth. So now, NVIDIA is potentially paying more in business taxes to the government, and that's going to, of course, generate revenue for the government through the IRS. But that means all the other businesses that those investment dollars were taken from aren't paying those taxes. So it's just a movement of the wealth. It's not a growth, and I don't understand why they don't see this.
But one of the things I've been thinking about lately is, I think one of the assumptions of just our economic and political debates is that, growth is hard to achieve. It's this unicorn. There are all kinds of ways you can kill the golden goose. We could enter a world where growth is really easy, and it's kind of the distribution that's hard because it's happening so fast, right?
Right.
The pie is being increased so fast.
So before we get to the hard problem, one more note of optimism then on politics. I think, and here it's a little more, all of this is speculative, but I think it's a little more speculative. You try and make the case that AI could be good for democracy and liberty around the world, which is not necessarily intuitive. A lot of people say, incredibly powerful technology in the hands of authoritarian leaders leads to concentrations of power and so on.
And I talk about that in the other episode.
But just briefly, what is the optimistic case for why AI is good for democracy?
Okay, before we get to that, Ross just set this up in a very important way. The concern is that tyrants would use this great grand power to do more tyrannical things. Why is that? Because sin. People who have been, so this goes back to our theology and worldview as Christians. People have been corrupted by sin, and the Bible tells us that will rule their life, and they will increasingly do more sinful things, right? Once you are controlled and dominated by sin, and you've rejected God, and you're on that path, it will continue to destroy you, right? This is why tyrants continue to do increasingly tyrannical things. And when they're pressured, when they're pushed into a corner, they become increasingly drastic and increasingly dramatic in their work, and they tighten their fist, right? That's what tyrants do. And they don't care about the effect of other people. They care about power, control, and dominion for themselves unto suicide. This is why the tyrant would rather burn the entire kingdom down than lose power. This is a worldview that we need to understand and view this conversation through. This is what we understand as tyrants, right? They would rather burn the system down than lose control. And because they are controlled by sin, they will always be doing increasingly bad things. If you give them more power, they use it for more bad things. This is just the nature of tyrants. This is why they're called tyrants.
Yeah, absolutely. So machines of loving grace, I kind of like, I'm just like, let's dream. Let's talk about how it could go well. I don't know how likely it is, but we got to lay out a dream. Let's try and make the dream happen. So I think the positive version, I admit there that I don't know that the technology inherently favors liberty, right? I think it inherently favors curing disease, and it inherently favors economic growth. But I worry, like you, that it may not inherently favor liberty.
Okay, well, that's a big problem, because part of our core values as a nation is liberty and justice for all. So if we're pursuing a technology that on its face is counterintuitive, it works against us naturally, our worldview and our system, then maybe we shouldn't be doing this.
What I say there is, can we make it favor liberty, right? Can we make the United States and other democracies get ahead in this technology? The United States has been technologically and militarily ahead, has meant that we have throw weight around the world through, augmented by our alliances with other democracies. And, we've been able to shape a world that I think, is better than the world would be if it were shaped by Russia or by China or by other authoritarian countries. And so can we use our lead in AI to shape liberty around the world? There's obviously a lot of debates about how interventionist we should be, how we should wield that power. But, I've often worried that, today through social media, authoritarians are kind of undermining us, right? Can we counter that? Can we win the information war? Can we prevent authoritarians from, invading countries like Ukraine or Taiwan by defending them with the power of AI,
with giant swarms of AI powered drones,
which we need to be careful about.
Right.
We ourselves need to be careful about how we build those. We need to defend, liberty in our own country. But is there some vision where we kind of like re-envision liberty and individual rights in the age of AI, right? Where, we need in some ways to be protected against AI. Someone needs to hold the button on the swarm of drones, which is something I'm very concerned about, and that oversight doesn't exist today. But, also think about the justice system today, right? We promise equal justice for all, right? But, the truth is, there are different judges in the world. The legal system is imperfect. I don't think we should replace judges with AI, but is there some way in which AI can help us to be more fair, to help?
Okay, before we get into this, he's talking about, again, radical transformation of our systems with AI. He just says, like, our system of our justice system is unjust because it's dependent upon people, and people are corrupted by sin. Agreed. This is the core theology of Christianity. His answer is, let's replace them with machines, or let's use machines to control the people, to keep them tame so they can't do bad things. And this is also the worldview that he's applying to what he calls tyrants. He's calling out China and Russia here and saying, and he relates this to social media. So he says, first, we have this problem on social media, and that's that the tyrants are winning the information war. They're winning the hearts and minds and the political debate through social media. And so he's saying maybe we should use AI to counter that. Now Ross interrupts him there and says, like, should we defend nations like Ukraine and Taiwan with drone swarms? That's a kind of a different problem, because at first Amodei is talking about we should use information, the power of information and AI, to communicate to the world and sort of evangelize democracy and liberty to the world, to convince tyrants that they shouldn't be able to do tyrannical things. Like, okay, that doesn't work with tyrants, right? You can't convince the population of the tyrant that they shouldn't let the tyrant be in power. The population of tyrants know that the tyrant shouldn't be in power. Nobody likes a tyrant. So giving them more information and debating them on social media is certainly not the answer. But then right away he pivots from that into this idea that we can use AI to control the sinful tendencies of mankind, that if we put this technology over us, if we put it into the justice system over us, if we put it into the social media system over us, if we put it into places where we're having political conversations and cultural conversations, and it can moderate down, or it can keep us from sinning, or it can keep the truth in an elevated point of view, then we can tame the human condition. Then we can tame and control sin. We can keep tyrants from doing bad things. We can keep judges in check, make sure that they're adjudicating judiciously. We can keep juries in check. We can manage this entire process if we would just bring AI over humanity and subject all of that we do and conquer the effects of sinful nature via this technology. It's really important for you to see this, again, as a Christian. So earlier he talked about solving sickness and death with the technology and transcending that state of humanity. Now he's talking about transcending sin's corrupting nature on our behavior throughout society by using AI as a technology that
help us
is
be more
us,
uniform, right? It's never been possible.
Oh, and he's also touched on a few points here, saying that in order to do this, we need to transform things. We need to redefine liberty. We need to redefine the justice system. We need to redefine conversation. We need to redefine. He's talking about this radical revolution where this technology is going to transform everything, which again is what I tried to call to attention in my piece about unemployment. All right, let's keep going.
Before, but can we somehow use AI to create something that is fuzzy, but where also you can give a promise that it's being applied in the same way to kind of everyone?
Quality control for the humans.
I don't know exactly how it should be done, and I don't think we should
quality control for the humans. Got it.
Replace the Supreme Court with AI. That's not my vision.
We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah, but just this idea that can we deliver on the promise of equal opportunity and equal justice by some combination of AI and humans? There has to be some way to do that. And so just thinking about reinventing democracy for the AI age and enhancing liberty instead of
reinventing democracy for the AI agent. Reinventing democracy. All right. So we're talking about using a technology in the context of our proper worldview and our proper value system. Democracy is core to our cultural and political identity. So reinventing it for the sake of AI so that we can control ourselves from sinning. That's not the answer. This is putting the technology in the place of God, in the place of Christ. The answer is we need to turn to Christ and let him renew us, and break us from our slavery to sin so that we can be good just judges and justices. We needed to reaffirm our moral and ethical value system and turn to Christ and put him as Lord over all things so that he alone who is good can work good through us to bear the fruit of the Spirit into this world. Amodei is proposing the opposite. He's not even considering God and Christ in this conversation. He's saying we can control and temper man and keep our sin in check through the machines, but it's going to require us to even redefine democracy.
Yeah.
Reducing it.
Good. So that's good. That's a very positive vision. We're leading longer lives, healthier lives. We're richer than ever before. All of this is happening in a compressed period of time where you're getting a century of economic growth in 10 years. And we have increased liberty around the world and equality at home. Disruptive, right? And this is where the lines that you've been quoted saying, 50% of white collar jobs get disrupted, or 50% of entry level white collar jobs, and so on. So on a 5-year time horizon or a 2-year time horizon, whatever time horizon you have, what jobs, what professions are most vulnerable to total AI disruption?
Yeah. It's hard.
Okay, so there's some language there. When they say AI disruption, what jobs are vulnerable to AI disruption? What he's talking about is AI replacing humans, which is what Amodei started with at the very beginning of this conversation. So now they're going to talk about 50% of jobs being white collar jobs being disrupted. That means 50% of jobs being replaced by AI. That means 50% of white collar workers being unemployed. That's what they're talking about right now. All right, let's keep going.
Hard to predict these things because the technology is moving so fast and kind of moves so unevenly. So
okay, there's just so much in this video. When things are moving so fast that you can't control them and you don't know where they're leading you to, the wisest thing you could possibly do is stop. When you are out of control, you stop.
At least a couple principles for figuring out, and then I'll give my guesses at what I think will be disrupted. So, one thing is I think the technology itself and its capabilities will be ahead of the actual job disruption. Two things have to happen for jobs to be disrupted or for productivity to occur, because sometimes those two things are linked. One is the technology has to be capable of doing it. And the second is there's this messy thing of, it actually has to be applied within a large bank or a large company, or, think about customer service or something, right? In theory, AI customer service agents can be much better than human customer service agents. They're more patient, they know more, they handle things in a more uniform way, but the actual...
Listen to his worldview. The machines are better than people. That's the worldview that he keeps. The machines are better at this than humans. So why are we wasting our time with humans?
Logistics and the actual process of making that substitution, that takes some time. So
job loss.
I'm very bullish about the kind of the direction of the AI itself. I think we might have that country of geniuses in a data center in 1 or 2 years. And maybe it'll be 5, but it could happen very fast. But I think the diffusion to the economy is going to be a little slower, and that diffusion creates some unpredictability. So an example of this is, and we've seen within Anthropic, the models writing code has gone very fast. I don't think it's because the models are inherently better at code. I think it's because developers are used to fast technological change and they adopt things quickly. They're very socially adjacent to the AI world, so they pay attention to what's happening in it. If you do customer service or banking or manufacturing, the distance is a little greater. And so I think 6 months ago, I would have said the first thing to be disrupted is, these kind of entry level white collar jobs like, data entry or, kind of document review for law, or kind of, the things you would give to a first year at a financial industry company where you're analyzing documents. And I still think those are going pretty fast. But I actually think software might go even faster.
Okay, before we get into that, note that he's talking about entry-level jobs. How do you get started in your career? You start with an entry-level job. That's That's what entry level is the start of your career, is the beginning of something. Back in the day, it used to be apprenticeship, right? You would get an apprenticeship and you would be trained up into that particular profession until you were at least proficient enough to carry on the trade craft on your own, or at least to carry customers on behalf of the master craftsman, and you were able to contribute in a productive way. But when you're an apprentice, when you're entry level, you're not really adding much value. You're learning the skills of the trade, you're learning the context, you're doing some of the basic work. Part of this is exposure, part of it is doing meaningful work, that is all part of building this foundation for you so that you can do the higher level work. And he's saying all those entry level jobs, give them to robots. What does that mean? It means the entry level, the entrance into careers is eliminated. There's no apprenticeship. There's no way to start building the foundations of what it means to be in the career if you just get rid of it. Let's keep going.
Because of the reasons that I gave, where I don't think we're that far from the models being able to do a lot of it end to end. And what we're going to see is, first, the model only does a piece of what the human software engineer does, and that increases their productivity. Then even when the models do everything that human software engineers used to do, the human software engineers kind of take a step up and, they act as managers and supervise the systems. And so
this is where the term centaur
of what? Okay, so he just said that the human software engineer, the machine takes over the human software engineering work, and the human software engineer, all the things, he just says all the things the software engineer used to do, the machines are now doing. So what does the software engineer do? They're going to talk about this supervisory role where the software engineer now controls all these software agents and all the development work that they're doing. But to what? So there's this mythology in the AI revolution that all the things that we are doing as humans today is just busy work, that there's more important things to get to. There's bigger problems to solve. There's this higher plane of living that we could potentially access if we could just get rid of all the mundane things of life. Well, folks, back to worldview. All these mundane things of life are what make life what it is. This is what it means to be human, struggling through difficult things, doing mundane work, building patterns of life that are normal. This is what is most important, living day to day, and the challenges of life and the joys of life and the rhythms of life. This is all meaningful. This isn't just, we should discard all of this so that we can get to these unknown better things that we should all be doing with our time. If we had superpowers, if we were gods, we could do so much more. I wrote an article about this as well. This is one of the big myths that the AI revolutionaries propose to business leaders, that if they adopt AI, they will finally be able to get to those bigger things that they can't get to right now. I think that is complete BS. The reality is you are already doing the most important things in your life context. If you are surrendering your life to Christ, no matter what it looks like, if you are poor, working an entry-level job, whatever, if you are surrendering your life completely to Christ and you believe that he is Lord over all, that he has sovereign control over all things, and that he is working in your life what needs to be worked in his way, in his timing, in his good and perfect will, then your life is what it's supposed to be. Even if it looks mundane and boring and you're doing, information processing for a paralegal organization that could be automated away, you are doing the meaningful things of life. And the employer that is employing you is naturally going to prioritize what's most important for them. What they're talking about, again, is like they view life today as a complicated mess that's just unnecessarily complicated, unnecessary work, busy work. Brush it all aside, get us to this new higher level plane of things, and then we'll go from there. Now, they don't really talk about it in this interview, but Sam Altman of OpenAI, at least I appreciate the fact that he's a little bit honest about this, a little bit. He talks about the fact that the future in this new realization, this new transhumanist plane of existence, is going to be so radically different that we can't even today imagine what life will be like in that new context. We have no idea what we will do in these supervisory roles, being gods of gods. We'll have no idea what that life is going to be like or what we'll do, because it's going to be so radically different. We can't even imagine for ourselves today what that will be. That's what they're talking about right now, that context right now. Listen to how he's just dismissing the valuable parts of life that are the things that Christ works through in order to transform and redeem us and refine us and purify us and work in us. Life has meaning. All the difficulties and struggles and joys and pleasures and rhythms and values and sacraments, it is all meaningful. but he's saying it's not. Dump it all and make us enter this new plane of supervisors to do what? We don't know. Something better than what we're doing now.
Yes. It's used, right?
Yes.
To describe essentially like man and horse fused AI and engineer working together.
Got it.
Yeah,
right?
This is like centaur chess. So after I think Garry Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue, there was an era that I think for chess was 15 or 20 years long where a human checking the output of the AI playing chess was able to defeat any human or any AI system alone. That era at some point ended.
And then it's just
recently, and
just
then
AI.
it's just the machine.
Yep.
And so my worry, of course, is about that last phase. So I think we're already in our centaur phase for software, and I think during that centaur phase, if anything, the demand for software engineers may go up, but the period may be very brief. And so I have this concern for entry level white collar work, for software engineering work. It's just going to be a big disruption. I think my worry is just that it's all happening so fast.
All right. Big disruption. He's worried that we're going to lose jobs. We're going to lose our mission and purpose in life, our meaning in life, all the things that give us our means to sustain ourselves, access to opportunity. We're going to get rid of all that. He's a little bit concerned about it, but he still wants to make it happen. So he's not really that concerned because he just thinks we should continue through this. And then he ends with, but I'm worried that it's happening so fast. Okay. If things are out of control, moving too fast, and you can't forecast where you're going, you don't know where you're leading us to, it's going to be massively disruptive. You don't have answers and you just want us to go along and figure it out with you. That is foolish. I mean, that is stupid. When the machine you're driving is out of control, you do what you can to stop it. You don't just keep accelerating along with it and you hope you'll figure out once you get there what it's going to be like. That is stupid. I'm sorry. I'm sure Amodei is a brilliant man from an intellectual perspective, but this is just foolish. It is absolutely lacking in wisdom.
Right. People talk about previous disruptions, right? They say, oh yeah, well, we used to be farmers, then we all, worked in industry, then we all did knowledge work. Yeah, people adapted. That happened over centuries or decades.
And that's the moral way to do it. There is a moral and proper way to take what exists today. If it does become deprecated because we can do something else better, if it does become obsolete, that happens by the choice of those who are engaged in the process. It happens through the choice of consumers and manufacturers and all that. And it is a gradual thing that's done by time. I talk about this in my ethics article about the using as an example, the transition from cassette tapes for movies to DVDs. Like this happened gradually over time, but still there was a transfer of activity. The manufacturers of cassette players were able to change what they manufactured and manufacture DVD players. They didn't just disappear overnight. They didn't just vanish very rapidly because we said we wanted a different media. Same with consumers. Consumers weren't unable to watch movies anymore. We were able to slowly update our libraries and stop buying cassettes and switch over to DVDs and start buying DVDs. All that entire industry transitioned over. That is the moral and the ethical way of going about this. The AI revolutionaries ignore that. They just say, we got to go as fast as we possibly can. It's going to be massively disruptive. It's going to be forced upon you. That in itself is immoral.
Right.
This is happening over low single digit numbers of years. And maybe that's my concern there. How do we get people to adapt fast enough?
But is there also something maybe where industries like software and professions like coding that have this kind of comfort that you describe move faster, but in other areas, people just want to hang out in the centaur phase? So one of the critiques of the job loss hypothesis people will say, well, look, we've had AI that's better at reading a scan than a radiologist for a while, but there isn't job loss in radiology. People keep being hired and employed as radiologists. And doesn't that suggest that in the end?
This is a really interesting point because there's a similar truth about the medical industry when it comes to something that Larry Ellison has been saying. Larry Ellison from Oracle, his big thing on AI is that we can use it to cure cancer and we can create customized vaccines for you and I relative to the diseases that we have using the mRNA technology. And he says that AI is the only thing that's going to bring that to pass. That's not true. We can currently sequence diseases down to the molecular level, and we can compare them. The problem is the application of that. The problem is the cure is oftentimes worse than the disease, and it leads to a bunch of potential other complications further in life. So you may cure that person of cancer, which may have had other ways to cure, or they may have overcome it in other ways. But by using that technology in order to create the cure and administer the cure, you created, 10 other health risks that lower the overall quality of life for the person down to being alive, but being miserable because of all these other health. These are the issues of moving too fast. When you just say, we're going to use the technology to solve this problem, and then once we get there, we'll figure out. You create all sorts of problems when you just go for the sake of going without going for the sake of wisdom. But Ross's point here is right on. We already have technology that can do these things that you're proposing, but we have already chosen not to. We have chosen to stick with the human system. So how do you account for that?
People will want the AI, and they'll want a human to interpret it because we're human beings, and that will be true across other fields. Like how do you see that example as relevant?
I think it's going to be pretty heterogeneous. There may be areas where a human touch, kind of for its own sake, is particularly important.
Do you think that's what's happening in radiology? Is that why we haven't fired all the radiologists? I don't know the
details of radiology. That might be true. Okay. It's like you go in and you're getting cancer diagnosed. Like, you might not want, Hal from 2001 to be the one to diagnose your cancer. Like, it's just not. Maybe that's just maybe not a human way
important after all
of doing things. No. But there are other areas where you might think human touch is important. Like if we look at customer service. Actually, customer service is a terrible job, and the humans who do customer service are like, they lose their patience a lot. And it turns out customers don't much like talking to them because it's a pretty robotic interaction, honestly. And I think the observation that many people have had is like, maybe actually it would be better for all concerned if this job were done by machines.
For all concerned, the people in that job.
There are places where human touch is important. There are places where it's not. And then there are also places where, the job itself doesn't really involve, it doesn't really involve human touch, assessing the financial prospects of companies or writing code or so.
It should involve a human touch. These are all human activities. Assessing the software or the financial status of a company is in service to humans. Like that's what. So why would it not have a human touch? If the reason those companies exist is for human benefit. So if we're assessing the financial health and wellness and strategy for a company, why would we not have a human whom the company exists to benefit be the one that's in charge of doing that strategic planning? Why would we have machines do the strategic planning for the benefit of humans? See, this is the inversion of reality that these transhumanists see the world through.
So forth and so on.
Or let's take the example of the law, because I think it's a useful place that's sort of in between applied science and sort of pure humanities, whatever. So I know a lot of lawyers who have looked at what AI can do already in terms of legal research and brief writing and all of these things, right? And have said, yeah, this is going to be a bloodbath for the way our profession works right now. And you've seen this in the stock market already. There's sort of disturbances around companies that do legal research.
Some
right?
attributed to us. I don't know if they were actually caused.
We don't
why things happen.
We
in the
don't
stock
speculate
market
about the stock market.
Yeah.
So diffusing accountability. He's saying like there's a disruption happening, bloodbath in this market. And Amodei's like, yeah, it could have been us, but it maybe not us. I'm not going to take any credit for that. And I'm also not going to take any blame for that. I'm just going to keep shoving this down your throat and causing this to happen. And whatever, I'm just going to dismiss it with a little chuckle. These guys are cold.
Very much on this show. But it seems like in law, you can tell a pretty straightforward story where law has a kind of system of training and apprenticeship where you have paralegals and you have junior lawyers who do behind the scenes research and development for cases. And then it has the top tier lawyers who are actually in the courtroom and so on. And it just seems really easy to imagine a world where all of the apprentice roles go away. Does that sound right to you? And you're just left with sort of the jobs that involve talking to clients, talking to juries, talking to judges?
That is what I had in mind when I talked about, entry level white collar labor and, the bloodbath headlines of, oh my God, are the entry level pipelines gonna kind of dry up? And then how do we get to the level of the senior partners? Right. And I think this is actually a good illustration because, particularly if you froze the quality of the technology in place, there are over time ways to adapt to this, right? Maybe we just need more lawyers who spend their time talking to clients, right? Maybe lawyers are more like, become more like salespeople or consultants who, explain what goes on in the contracts written by AI, help people come to agreement. Maybe you lean into the human side of it. If we had enough time, that would happen.
We do have enough time. Why? Again, if you foresee danger, you don't rush into it, right? Unless you're trying to rescue someone from a fire, then you perceive danger and you rush into the fire and you rescue the person. That's not what's going on here. We're rushing to self-destruction, and then we're saying we'll figure it out later on. But he's speculating about why jobs have value or don't have value. He's standing on the outside of the legal profession and sitting here going arbitrarily, well, that job has no value because I can use a tool to do it. Or customer support, that job has no value. I don't care if you are satisfied as a customer support agent. I don't care what you're learning. I don't care about the value of gaining information through being a paralegal. In my opinion, because the machine can do it, none of that has value. And so the machines should just do it. And I'm just going to sit back here and speculate about, well, maybe there's a future where things are different. Maybe we're doing the wrong things. Maybe we're spending time on the wrong things. Maybe we should just be using lawyers to talk to people rather than gaining the knowledge and the expertise that they need in order to talk to people efficiently. This entire process of learning and practicing from the bottom up is what makes you an expert, and it is all meaningful. And for him to just sit back and hand wave and speculate about what's important and what's not important, this is the danger of these people who are just rushing headlong into this. And he just said, well, maybe if we have more time, we could just pause all of this and slowly adapt. Well, that would be the moral thing to do. But instead, it's no, we got to rush through this and figure out how to transform and adapt all things on the other side, which is just unwise.
But, reshaping industries like that takes years or decades, whereas these economic forces driven by AI are going to happen very quickly. And
so we're being led by AI. Economic forces being driven by AI are going to force us to go faster.
And it's not just they're happening in law. The same thing is happening in consulting and finance and medicine and coding.
Got it.
And so you have this, it becomes a macroeconomic phenomenon, not something just happening in one industry, and it's all happening very fast. And so the norm, my worry here is that the normal adaptive mechanisms will be overwhelmed.
The normal adaptive mechanisms will be overwhelmed. Screw you humans. Get over it. We're just going to do this anyway. You're not going to be able to adapt. We just need to rewrite and change everything. Listen to the words and the worldview of these people. It's incredible. And why? Go back to the beginning. Because the problems of humanity are so complex, we can't solve them. We can't get ourselves out of this fallen state of humanity. So we must build machines that can lift us out. And adapting to that, there's going to be all kinds of disruptions and problems, and we're going to have to redefine life and politics and keep the tyrants at bay. But you know what? Deal with it because it's just important. The economics of all this are far more important than the humanity.
And, I'm not a doomer. The view is, and we're thinking very hard about, how do we strengthen society's adaptive mechanisms to respond to this? But I think it's first important to say this isn't just like the other, this isn't just like previous disruption.
But I would then go one step further though and say, okay, let's say the law adapts successfully. And it says, all right, from now on, legal apprenticeship involves more time in court, more time with clients. We're essentially moving you up the ladder of responsibility faster. There are fewer people employed in the law overall, but the profession sort of settles.
Yes.
Still, the reason law would settle, right, is that you have all of these situations in the law where you are legally required to have people involved, right? You have to have a human representative in court. You have to have 12 humans on your jury. You have to have a human judge. And you already mentioned the idea that there are various ways in which AI might be, let's say, very helpful at clarifying what kind of decision should be reached. But that too seems like a scenario where what preserves human agency is law and custom.
Right.
Like you could replace the judge with
we don't want
Claude
to.
version 17.9, but you choose not to because the law requires there to be a human.
Not only the law, but because our morals and our value system, which I know Ross is going to get into this, and I don't blame him for not doing it. He's guiding this interview in an excellent way. But I want to extrapolate that out, and I'll do this work on behalf of Ross, so he doesn't have to. It's not just that we have contained ourselves to this way of life because we lack the technology to do it some other way. It's because we've chosen to, because it fits into our moral and our value system, right? So the system by which we live, at least when it was created and established, we said it was good to do things this way. Our morals and our values have led us to this point.
That just seems like a very interesting way of thinking about the future, where it's volitional whether we stay in charge.
Yeah, that, and I would argue that in many cases we do want to stay in charge, right? That's a choice we want to make, even in some cases when we think the humans on average make kind of worse decision. I mean, again, life critical, safety critical cases, we really want to turn it over. But there's some sense of, and this
critical
could be
critical cases. He says we want to turn those over to the machines because people will get it wrong, is what he's saying here.
One of our defenses, society can only adapt so fast if it's going to be good.
Right.
Another way you could say about it is, like maybe AI itself, if it didn't have to care about us humans, it could just go off to Mars and like build all these automated factories and build its own society and do its own thing. But that's not the problem we're trying to solve. We're not trying to solve the problem of, building a Dyson swarm of, of like artificial robots at, on some other planet. We're trying to build these systems, not so they can conquer the world, but so that they can interface with our society and improve that society. And there's a maximum rate at which that can happen if we actually want to do it in a like human and humane.
Yep. Okay, so now he's kind of pivoting here. So originally he said we're going to build these machines to replace people so that we can achieve transcendence. And now he's kind of backpedaling a little bit and saying, well, these machines are supposed to be here to enhance our way of life, to make the human condition better, to be helpful to us, not to be a replacement to us. This is kind of the song and dance, because I think that these AI revolutionaries, when they're confronted, they realize the difficulties of these things. And so they have to kind of play this logic game in their mind of pretending that they're still the good guys by throwing out these talking points. But if you again listen to what they're proposing, it is against the words that they sometimes speak to us to sound like they're moderates, to sound like they're on our sides. It's very deceptive.
Way.
All right, we've been talking about white collar jobs and professional jobs, and one of the interesting things about this moment is that there are ways in which, unlike past disruptions, it could be that sort of blue collar working class jobs, trades, jobs that require intense physical engagement with the world might be for a little while more protected, that paralegals and junior associates might be in more trouble than, plumbers and so on, right? One, do you think that's right? And two, it seems like how long that lasts depends entirely on how fast robotics advances, right?
Yeah, I think that may be right in the short term. One of the things is, Anthropic and other companies are building these very large data centers, right? This has been in the news. Like, are we building them too big? They're using, they're using electricity and driving up the prices for local tasks. So, there's lots of excitement and lots of concerns about them. But one of the things about the data centers is like, you need a lot of electricians and you need a lot of construction workers to build them.
Temporarily.
I should be honest, actually, data centers are not super labor intensive jobs to operate. We should be honest about that, but they are very labor-intensive jobs to construct. And so, we need a lot of electricians. We need a lot of construction workers.
Temporarily.
The same for, various kinds of manufacturing plants. Again, as kind of all...
He's going to get to it in here in a second. But again, so temporary spike in jobs to build the infrastructure that we can then hand over to robots.
More and more of the intellectual work is done by AI. What are the complements to it? Things that happen in the physical world. So I think this kind of seems very, it's hard to predict things, but like it seems very logical that this would be true in the short run.
Sure.
Now, in the longer run, maybe just the slightly longer run, robotics is advancing quickly.
Here we go.
And we shouldn't exclude that even without very powerful AI, there are things being automated in the physical world. If you've seen a Waymo or a Tesla recently, I think we're not that far from the world of self-driving cars. And then I think AI itself will accelerate it, because if you have these really smart, brains, one of the things they're going to be smart at is how do you design better robots and how do you operate better robots.
Do you think that, though, that there is something distinctively difficult about operating in physical reality the way humans do that is very different from the kind of problems that AI models have been overcoming already?
Okay, I want to rephrase his question, because he's asking Amodei in a specific way this question. He's effectively asking, do you think that there is still value to humans in terms of how we negotiate the physical spaces together? Is there still something about humanity that is that we are better at living the physical world, living in Earth together than the machines can do? Because we're talking about self-driving cars, right? One of the theories about the self-driving car movement is that it's only going to work if we transfer over wholesale, because self-driving cars are very predictable. You can define a bunch of environmental variables, you can define a bunch of sensors and times and sequences and predictability, and they work great if they are only around other vehicles like them. As soon as you add the human factor with unpredictability, with decision making, with things that humans do, because this world is for us, then you make it very difficult for machines and humans to coexist in the same space. And that's what Ross is talking about. He's talking about, well, humans are complex. We have free will. We have preferences and choices. We make mistakes, and that's fine because we're humans and this world is for us. So he's proposing, isn't there a conflict between the two? Is there something still about humanity that makes it difficult for machines to operate in the same space? Is there something still unique about us that makes us better at interacting in the real world versus machines and automation?
Intellectually speaking, I don't think so.
He doesn't think that there's a difference between humans and machines, intellectually speaking. No difference. There's no advantage that humans have over machines, intellectually speaking. That's his answer.
We had this thing where Anthropic's model, Claude, was actually used to pilot the Mars rover. It was used to plan and pilot the Mars rover. And we've looked at other robotics applications. We're not the only company that's doing it. There are different companies that are, this is a general thing, not just something that we're doing.
Right.
But we have generally found that while the complexity is higher, piloting a robot it's not different in kind than playing a video game. It's different in complexity. And we're starting to get to the point where we have that complexity. Now, what is hard is the physical form of the robot handling the higher stakes safety issues that happen with robots. You don't want robots literally crushing people, right? That's the oldest,
we're against that.
Oldest sci-fi trope in the book is
or you don't want the robot nanny crushes you, dropping the baby, breaking the dishes.
Exactly. There's a number of practical issues that will slow, just like it, what you described in the law and in human custom, that there are these kind of safety issues that will slow things down. But
making the machines safe for humans will slow us down.
I don't believe at all that there is some kind of fundamental.
By the way, it should be the other way around. It should be prioritizing humans, which I guess they're doing by slowing this down, at least to a certain extent. But that shouldn't be the goal.
Difference between the kind of cognitive labor that AI models do and piloting things in the physical world. I think those are both information problems, and I think they end up being very similar. One can be more complex in some ways, but I don't think that will protect us here.
Okay, so I kind of talked over him in that last couple seconds, but again, he's reiterating the point that there's no difference between humans and machines. It's just a matter of complexity, and the machines will get complex enough to be able to do anything humans can do. So again, it's this worldview that the machines, if not today, soon will be better than anything we can do, and there's no advantage to being a human.
Okay, so you think it is reasonable to expect the kind of whatever your sci-fi vision of a robot butler might be to be a reality in 10 years, let's say.
It will be on a longer time scale than the kind of genius level intelligence of the AI models because of these practical issues, but it is only practical issues. I don't believe it is fundamental issues. I think one way to say it is that the brain of the robot will be made in the next couple years or the next few years. The question is making the robot body, making sure that body operates safely and does the tasks it needs to do. That may take longer.
Okay. Also, they can replace us.
These are challenges and disruptive forces that exist in the good timeline, in the timeline where we are generally curing diseases, building wealth, and maintaining a stable and democratic
world. And the hope is we can use all this enormous wealth and plenty.
Right.
We will have unprecedented societal resources to like address these problems. Right. It'll be a time of plenty, and it's just a matter of taking all these wonders and making sure everyone benefits from them.
But then there are also scenarios that are more dangerous, right?
Correct.
And so here we're going to move to the second Amodei essay, which came out recently, called The Adolescence of Technology, that is about what you see as the most serious AI risks. And you list a whole bunch. I want to try and focus on just two, which are basically the risk of human misuse primarily by authoritarian regimes and governments, and scenarios where AI goes rogue. What do you call autonomy risks?
Yes.
Right.
I just figured we should have a more technical term for it. I'm not a
we can't just call it Skynet.
I should have had like a picture of a Terminator robot to like scare people as much as possible.
I think the internet, including your own AIs, are already generating that.
The internet does that for us
just fine. So let's talk about the kind of political military dimension, right? So you say, I'm going to quote, a swarm of billions of fully automated armed drones, locally controlled by powerful AI, strategically coordinated across the world by even more powerful AI, could be an unbeatable army. And you've already talked a little bit about how you think that in the best possible timeline, there's a world where essentially democracies stay ahead of dictatorships, and this kind of technology, therefore, to the extent that it affects world politics, is affecting it on the side of the good guys. I'm curious about why you don't spend more time thinking about the model of what we did in the Cold War, right? Where, it was not swarms of robot drones, but we had a technology that threatened to destroy all of humanity.
Weapons,
right.
Same thing.
There was a window where people talked about, the U.S. could maintain a nuclear monopoly. That window closed, and from then on, we basically.
So just to clarify, this is a really good challenge. Amodei has so far proposed that we would have that monopoly, that the U.S. would be able to use this technology for the greatest good of mankind, and we would stay in control through using the technology for political influence, also militarily, although mostly he's talked about political influence. Remember going back to that social media thing where we have these swarms of bots that are in social media speaking the truth to tyrants, and that's going to somehow convince the tyrants not to do tyrannical things, or however that's going to play out. And so far he's talked about that, and that indeed seems to be what the Trump administration is positioning with Project Genesis and the adoption of AI militarily. It seems to be that we need to get to control of this first. It is an arms race in that regard, which is why I think Ross is doing a great job of drawing the parallels. There's this window of time where we recognize this technology exists, we recognize the dangers, and the opportunity is to get there first and be the one that has the biggest arsenal of nuclear weapons, and then you win? Or is there something else?
We spent the Cold War in sort of rolling, ongoing negotiations with the Soviet Union. Right now, there's really only two countries in the world that are doing intense AI work, the US and the People's Republic of China. I feel like you are strongly weighted towards a future where we're staying ahead of the Chinese and effectively building a kind of shield around democracy that could even be a sword. But isn't it just more likely that if humanity survives all this in one piece, it will be because the US and Beijing are just constantly sitting down hammering out AI control deals?
So a few points on this. One is I think there's certainly risk of that. And I think if we end up in that world, that is actually exactly what we should do. I mean, maybe I don't maybe I don't talk about that enough, but like I definitely am in favor of like, trying to work out restraints here, right? Trying to take some of the worst applications of the technology, which could be some versions of these drones, which could be, they're used to create these terrifying biological weapons. Like there is some precedent for the worst abuses being curbed. Often because they're horrifying while at the same time they provide kind of limited strategic advantage. So I'm all in favor of that. I'm at the same time, a little concerned and a little skeptical that, when things, kind of directly provide as much power as possible, it's kind of hard to get out of the game, given what's at stake, right? It's hard to fully disarm. If we go back to the Cold War, we were able to reduce the number of missiles that both sides had, but we were not able to entirely forsake nuclear weapons. And I would guess that we would be in this world again. We can hope for a better one, and I'll certainly advocate for it.
Well, is your skepticism rooted in the fact that you think AI would provide a kind of advantage that nukes did not, where you still probably would be wiped out yourself, and you think that wouldn't happen with AI? If you got an AI edge, you would just win?
I mean, I think there's a few things, and I just want to caveat, like, I'm no international politician.
Before he gives his answer, I want to point out something real fast. So let's think about this in the context of the Cold War and the development of nuclear weapons, because it's a really important question Ross is asking here. Let's think about back to World War II. The world's at war. Where the U.S. is developing this new technology, nuclear weapons. Nobody knows that we have it yet. There's all the secrecy around developing this new weapon that's going to give us the ability to defeat any adversary anywhere on the planet and end the war. Was the highest priority, but then it sets us up with a power that can't be countered by any other military. So it does set us up as the dominant power in the world. Okay, if Germany or Japan, if the Axis powers knew that we were on the cusp of building this weapon, the nuclear bomb, if they knew that we had done some tests and experiments in the deserts of Nevada and it had proof of concept done, and we were working on weaponizing that and making it smaller and containable to drop as a bomb, I guarantee you they would have put all of their effort and energy into invading Nevada or doing something else to stop us from achieving that outcome. So I think today, if China believes, or Russia, or any of the tyrannical regimes of this world, if they believe this AI story, that whoever gets there first will have the ability to dominate and control the entire world, which is what Amodei is talking about, not only militarily, but he's talking about, again, political influence through mind control and information dissemination by these AI-powered robots and social media, or however that's going to work. He's talking about the AI will dominate the world through Western value system, which he doesn't even seem to understand what Western values really are. He believes that the tyrants will just back down and accept defeat, that they will acknowledge that, the U.S. got there first, and all will be well. I don't see that is anywhere near possible. My guess is our adversaries would do what I just described, that as soon as they figure out that we are close to having global dominance via this technology, they'll just bomb our data centers. They'll find some ways of infiltrating the country, and sabotaging the systems that run our AI. Maybe they'll disrupt power. Maybe they'll disrupt, I don't know what, materials manufacturing, communications. I don't know, something. But there's no reality in which Xi Jinping says, the U.S. got there first, we lost, we will just sit back and let the U.S. And whomever is in power in the U.S. dictate to the rest of the world the terms of peace and structure. And what they're talking about is one world government implemented through coercion and force via AI as a technology, and that the rest of the world will just go along with it because AI will be so great that AI will be able to subdue them in all the ways possible. And then he's going to talk about how tyrants won't actually use weapons of mass destruction because they are destructive against themselves. Well, that's not something we actually believe. We believe that because tyrants are tyrants, that they will use weapons of mass destruction if they believe that there is no other opportunity. We all believe, this is our big concerns over the Russia-Ukraine war. We all believe that if backed into a corner, Putin would probably use nuclear weapons. We all believe that if Xi Jinping can't have Taiwan, he'll probably eliminate it. Like, that's what we all believe. This is the way tyrants work. We believe that this is what allegedly happened in Syria, that when backed against a corner, Assad used chemical and biological weapons against his own people. This is what tyrants do. Amodei doesn't understand this part of sin and what it means to be a tyrant. And so he's envisioning this world where we can negotiate peace and let the AI control, and that the rest of the world will just go along with that, or the AI will be so powerful it will force them to go along with it, and they'll just sit back and accept it. They won't revert to other ways of diffusing or disrupting our AI. They'll just go, okay, well, we lost, and that is what it is. That, or he thinks the AI will be so incredibly powerful as a shield that there will be nothing that they can do about it. But if that's the story that our adversaries are going to believe, again, I guarantee you they're going to do everything that they possibly can to get ahead of us and make sure that we don't have that capability.
Politics expert here. Like, I think, this is this weird world of like intersection of a new technology with, geopolitics. So all of this is like very.
But to be clear, as you yourself say in the course of the essay, the leaders of major AI companies are in fact likely to be major geopolitical actors.
Yeah.
So you are sitting here. You are sitting here
talking about reforming the entire world and the human condition. You are a geopolitical actor. So for him to say, like, I don't know, you can't hold me accountable for these sorts of things, it is incredible.
As a potential geopolitical actor,
I'm learning as much as I can about it. I just, we should all have humility here. Like, I think there's a failure mode where you read a book and go around, like the world's greatest expert in national security. I'm trying to learn. That's
what my profession does. But
it's more annoying when tech people do it. I don't know. Let's look at something like the Biological Weapons Convention, right? Biological weapons, they're horrifying. Everyone hates them. Like, we were able to sign the Biological Weapons Convention. The U.S. genuinely stopped developing them. It's somewhat more unclear with the Soviet Union, but biological weapons provide some advantage. But it's not like they're the difference between winning and losing. And because they were so horrifying, we were kind of able to give them up. Having 12,000.
That is not true. Tyrants use them. There was just a court case in Russia. Navalny was poisoned using a biological weapon. There's lots of examples of Assad using biological weapons against his own people in their uprising. There are questions right now of Iran using biological weapons in what they're doing. There was a biological weapons lab that was just uncovered near Las Vegas, run by a Chinese national, and one that was just found a couple years ago in California, the same context. This idea that he thinks that biological weapons are so dangerous that no one would use them, I don't understand where he's coming from here. Of course they do.
Nuclear weapons versus 5,000 nuclear weapons. Again, you can kill more people on the other side if you have more of these, but it's like we were able to be reasonable and like say we should have less of them. But if you're like, okay, we're going to completely disarm nuclearly and we have to trust the other side, I don't think we ever got to that. And I think that's just very hard unless you had really reliable verification. So I would guess we'll end up kind of in the same world with AI, that there are some kinds of restraint that are going to be possible, but there are some aspects that are so central to the competition that it will be hard to restrain them, that democracies will make a trade-off, that they will be willing to restrain themselves more than authoritarian countries, but will not restrain themselves fully. And the only world in which I can see full restraint is one in which some kind of truly reliable verification is possible. That would be my guess and my analysis.
Isn't this a case though for slowing down?
Yes.
And I know the argument is effectively, if you slow down, China does not slow down, and then you're handing things over to the authoritarians. But if you have right now only two major powers playing in this game, it's not a multipolar game. Why would it not make sense to say we need a 5-year mutually agreed upon down in research towards the geniuses in a data center scenario?
I want to say two things at one time, right? I'm absolutely in favor of trying to do that. So, during the last administration, I believe.
Here's another proposal for you. So if the West is really, so there's two nations involved in AI research, the West and China, or the US and China. And almost all of the true companies developing artificial intelligence are US companies, are Silicon Valley companies. That's just true. China seems to be copying us, replicating. Maybe they've got some advantages in some places, but for the most part, they're not leading the technology in this space. So if we are truly leading the technology in this space, if these concerns are real that Amodei is sharing with us, and the risk is existential in nature of a rogue nation or a tyrannical nation getting there first, then why would we not put all of our effort in AI in preventing them from getting there first? Not accelerating the problem, but keeping them from developing the technology. Going back to our World War II analogy with Germany, what if Germany had the ability to disrupt the development of the nuclear bomb without allowing us to develop the bomb and without them developing the bomb? What if they could stop the progression from happening and say, this is a space that's too dangerous, and so we're going to turn AI into an offensive capability right now for the sake of preventing it from being developed. Like, why wouldn't we pursue that? That seems like a wise thing to do, right?
If there was an effort by the US to reach out to the Chinese government and say, there are dangers here. Can we collaborate? Can we work together? Can we kind of work together on the dangers? And there wasn't that much interest on the other side. I think we should keep trying, but
even if that would mean that your labs would have to slow down.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
If we really got it, if we really had a story of like, we can enforceably slow down, the Chinese can enforceably slow down, we have verification, we're really doing it. Like, if such a thing were really possible, if we could really get both sides to do it, then I would be all for it. But I think what we need to be careful of is, I don't know, there's this game theory thing where, like, sometimes you'll hear a comment on the CCP side where they're like, oh yeah, AI is dangerous, we should slow down. It's really cheap to say that. And like, actually arriving at an agreement and actually sticking to the agreement is much more.
No, and we haven't.
Is much more difficult.
Right. And nuclear arms control was, it was a developed field that,
yes.
Okay, so what Amodei just said is you can't trust the Chinese, which is right. You can't. They are our adversary. They are a godless society. At least the leadership is. They've rejected God, and they are pursuing communism and socialism, and they are bad. Right. They will not negotiate with us. They will lie to our face, and they will not do things that are mutually beneficial. We know this. This is true. Here's the trick, Mr. Amodei. That same sin that controls Xi Jinping and makes him untrustworthy and untrustable is the same sin that controls the life of every human being, including the AI revolutionaries that are building this technology. So we also cannot trust them. It's the same sin. It's the same corruption. You are also human beings. And so there's no reason for you to say, well, I, a godless man, should be trusted more than Xi Jinping, a godless man. That either of you're drawing a moral equivalency across the two, saying he sort of accepts Western values because he's obviously the CEO of a Western company, and he kind of talked about Western values being good here, but he's not coming to Western values from their foundation. He's coming into Western values from the opposite perspective. He's looking at this from an upside down worldview, and he's coming at the fruit of the values and saying, we like the fruit of these values. We don't like the source. We don't like the tree. We don't like the foundation of where these things came from. So we're not going to adhere to that. We're just going to play down here at the net results. Well, now you're in moral ambiguity world, and there's really no reason to trust you versus Xi Jinping with this power. That's the story of Lord of the Rings, right? Once you have this ultimate power, whoever yields it, if they are not tethered to truth and goodness, it will corrupt them, and they will become the very tyrant that they're concerned about. This is a complete blind spot that the AI revolutionaries for some reason don't see. They just want to get that ring. They want the ring of power. They want to have absolute control. They believe that they will wield it for good. They alone can wield it for good. And so it is sort of owed to them to be the ones that get this power, and everyone else needs to just be suppressed because no one else can be trusted. No one else can be trusted with this. Only we can be. Okay.
Took a long time to come. Right. We don't have those protocols.
I will tell you something. Let me give you something I'm very optimistic about, and then something I'm like not optimistic about, and something in between. So the idea of using a worldwide agreement to restrain the use of AI to build biological weapons, right? Like some of the things I write about in the essay, like, reconstituting smallpox or mirror life, like this stuff is scary. Doesn't matter if you're a dictator. You don't want that. Like no one wants that.
Yes, they do.
And so could we have a worldwide treaty that says everyone who builds powerful AI models is going to block them from doing this? And, we have enforcement mechanisms around the treaty, like China signs up for it, like hell, maybe even North Korea signs up for it. Even Russia signs up for it. I don't think that's too utopian. I think that's possible.
It's never
Conversely, if we had something that said, you're not going to make the next, most powerful AI model. Everyone's going to stop. Boy, the commercial value is in the tens of trillions. The military value is like this.
The commercial value. So the commercial value is in the tens of trillions. So this is all because of wealth. This is all to pursue this dream of massive wealth. The reason he says we should not continue developing AI is because we're going to miss out on this massive wealth opportunity. This is what's driving the AI revolution. He will not slow down because he will not pass up on the potential wealth that he believes is possible from this.
This is the difference between being the preeminent world power and not proposing it, as long as it's not one of these fake out games, but it's not going to happen.
What about then, you mentioned the current environment, right? You've had a few skeptical things to say about Donald Trump and his trustworthiness as a political actor. What about the domestic landscape, whether it's Trump or someone else? You are building a tremendously powerful technology. What is the safeguard there to prevent essentially AI becoming a tool of authoritarian takeover inside a democratic context?
Yeah, I mean, look, just to be clear, I think the attitude we've taken as a company is very much to be about policies and not the politics, right? That, the company is not going to, say Donald Trump is great or Donald Trump is terrible. Like,
right. But it doesn't have to be Trump.
Yeah.
It is easy to imagine a hypothetical U.S. president
no.
who wants to use your technology.
Absolutely. And for example, that's one reason why I'm worried about.
What if somebody else has the One Ring?
The autonomous drone swarm, right? So, the constitutional protections in our military structures depend on the idea that there are humans who would, we hope, disobey illegal orders. With fully autonomous weapons, we don't necessarily have those protections. But I actually think this whole idea of constitutional rights and liberty along many different dimensions, can be undermined by AI if we don't update these protections.
Listen to that. So our constitutionally protected rights, essentially, the things that our Constitution protects, the things that our law can be disrupted by AI if we don't update those things
appropriately. So, think about the Fourth Amendment. It is not illegal to, put cameras around everywhere in public space and, record every conversation. It's a public space. You don't have a right to privacy in a public space. But today, the government couldn't record that all and make sense of it. Right. With AI, the ability to transcribe speech, to look through it, correlate it all, you could say, there's this, this person is a member of the opposition. This person is expressing this view, and make a map of all 100 million. And so, are you going to make a mockery of the Fourth Amendment by the technology finding kind of technical ways around it? And so, again, if we had the time, and we should do this, we should try to do this, even if we don't have the time. Is there some way of reconceptualizing constitutional rights and liberties in the age of AI? Like, we don't need to write a new constitutional, but
but you have to do this very
fast.
Do
we expand the meaning of the Fourth Amendment?
Okay, this is really important because, again, instead of looking at our core value system and our belief system and saying, how does it constrain us here in this context of use of this technology? We should look at our value system and say, well, we value these things first. This comes first. Our beliefs, our Constitution, our rights, our civilization, our morals. And so that should guide how we use this. What he's proposing is we just use the technology and then we will figure out, it's damaging or it's running counter to all these values. So therefore we need to update all these values. We need to change we need to redefine, we need to expand the Fourth Amendment. We need to kind of rework our value system to accommodate the AI revolution. That is That is absolutely the backwards way of approaching this. It's wrong. It's upside down.
Expand the meaning of the First Amendment.
And you have to do it just as the legal profession or software engineers has to update in a rapid amount of time. Politics has to update in a rapid amount of time. That seems hard.
That's
harder?
The dilemma.
Right.
That's the dilemma of all of this.
What seems harder?
The dilemma of all of this is that we cannot adapt fast enough to what they want to produce.
Is preventing the second danger, which is the danger of essentially what gets called misaligned AI, rogue AI in popular parlance, from doing bad things without human beings telling it, them, they to do it, right? And as I read your essays, the literature, everything I can see, this just seems like it's going to happen, right? Not in the sense necessarily that AI will wipe us all out, but it just seems to me that, I'm going to quote from your own writing, AI systems are unpredictable, difficult to control. We've seen behaviors as varied as obsession, sycophancy, laziness, deception, blackmail, and so on. Again, not from the models you're releasing into the world, right? But from AI models. And it just seems like, tell me if I'm wrong about this, in a world that has multiplying AI agents working on behalf of people, millions upon millions, who are being given access to bank accounts, email accounts, passwords, and so on, you're just going to have essentially some kind of misalignment, and a bunch of AI are going to decide might be the wrong word, but they're going to talk themselves into taking down the power grid on the West Coast or something. Won't that happen?
Yeah, I think there are definitely going to be things that go wrong, particularly if we go quickly. So,
okay, he wants to go as fast as possible, and now he's saying, as we go fast, particularly if we go quickly, we will have problems like that. These bot swarms that convince themselves to take down the power grid, and that's just going to be growing pains, he says. But think about the consequences of that. The bots take down the power grid, and do what then after that? And what does it take to get power grids back online? And what do humans do when power is out? For how long? These are growing pains. We'll get around it.
So I don't know, to back up a little bit, because this is one area where people have had just very different intuitions, right? Like there are some people in the field, like Jan LeCun would be one example, who say, look, we program these AI models, we make them, we just tell them to follow human instructions and they'll follow human instructions. Your Roomba vacuum cleaner doesn't go off and start shooting people. Why is an AI system going to do it? Right. That's one intuition. And some people are so convinced of that. And then the other intuition is we train these things. They're going to they're just going to seek power. It's like the Sorcerer's Apprentice. How could you possibly imagine that they're a new species. How can you imagine that they're not going to take over? And
okay, the Sorcerer's Apprentice analogy, he gets wrong here. The Sorcerer's Apprentice analogy, the problem with that is people that don't understand the power, they don't understand what they're doing, they unleash it, and it does what it's going to do. It repeats. It is the spell that has a greater effect than they anticipated, and they don't have any way of controlling it. They unleashed a power that they didn't know how to wield properly. That's the Sorcerer Apprentice problem. It's not that. So an example of that would be like this recent Moltbot thing, Moltbook thing. If you have all these bots that have access to machines and you don't understand what you're doing with those bots and you give them control over to something, and the machines all carry forward instructions that you didn't anticipate with these machines, it's going to have an effect on society that you didn't anticipate. It doesn't mean we believe the machines are going to become life forms that are going to take over the world and expand and grow their power on their own. No. It just means that you've set in motion a power or a series of events that you cannot control. And that is certainly, absolutely one of the concerns with this.
And my intuition is somewhere in the middle, which is that
he's trying to play as the moderate. He's definitely not. He's trying to play this game of I'm on the middle road. I'm safe. We can do this in a safe way. Follow me because I'm in the middle of all this.
Look, these, you can't just give instruction. I mean, we try, but you can't just, have these things do exactly what you want to do.
Yes, you can.
They're more like growing a biological organism.
You don't need to be.
There is a science of how to control them. Early in our training, these things are often unpredictable. And then we shape them. We address problems one by one.
This is a choice he's making. You absolutely can just keep these machines contained within, execute the code that I tell you to. That's what the original purpose of the LLMs was. There was no idea, there's no concept of giving them a mind of their own. That is a choice that we are making. It is leading us down this path, and it's a choice we don't have to make.
So I have more of a, not a fatalistic view that these things are uncontrollable, not a, what are you talking about? What could possibly go wrong? But I like, this is a complex engineering problem. And I think something will go wrong with someone's AI system, hopefully not ours, not because it's an insoluble problem, but again, this is the constant challenge because we're moving so fast.
And the scale of it. And tell me if I'm misunderstanding the sort of technological reality here, right? But if you have AI agents that have been trained and officially aligned with human values, whatever those values may be,
yes,
but you have millions of them, operating in digital space and interacting with other agents, right? Like,
yes,
how fixed is that alignment? Like, to what extent can agents change and de-align in that context right now or in the future when they're learning more continuously?
So a couple points. Right now, the agents don't learn continuously,
right?
Right, and so we just deploy these agents, and they have a fixed set of weights, and so the problem is only that they're interacting, in a million different ways, and so there's a large number of situations, and therefore a large number of things that could go wrong. But it's the same agent. It's like
right.
It's the same person. So the alignment is a constant thing. That's one of the things that has made it easier right now. Separate from that, there's a research area called continual learning, which is where these agents would kind of learn
right.
during time, learn on the job. And obviously that has a bunch of advantages. Some people think it's one of the most important, barriers to making these more human-like, but that would introduce all these new alignment problems. Yeah. So I'm actually
to me, that seems like the terrain where it becomes just, again, not impossible to stop the end of the world, but impossible to stop sort of punctuated terrorist
going wrong.
Things. Yeah.
So I'm actually a skeptic that continual learning, is necessary. We don't know yet, but is necessarily needed. Like maybe there's a world where the way we make these AI systems safe is by not having them do continual learning.
Right.
Again.
Okay, so that's an important distinction here, because the AI revolution teaches us, and a lot of the use cases that are being proposed to us, is that these machines are intelligent. The story is a super intelligence will emerge out of this. And one of the key attributes that we're meant to believe about the AIs is that they are continually learning, that they are always growing and expanding and becoming more and more sophisticated on their own. That is a big part of the AI revolution story. We're told that it's already happening and that it needs to happen, and that will lead to the establishment of beings, or the emergence of a life form, so to speak, that's going to come out of this technology. That is what Sam Altman, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Larry Ellison, that's what they are trying to produce. And so he's stacking himself up against the rest of the AI revolutionaries. And so if he doesn't want that outcome, then he's going to have to be the only AI that wins this race.
And again, if we go back to the laws and the international treaties, right. Like if you have some barrier that's like, we're going to take this path, but we're not going to take that path, I still have a lot of skepticism, but like that's the kind of thing that like at least doesn't seem dead on arrival.
Right. One of the things that you've tried to do is literally write a constitution, a long constitution for your AI. What is that?
So it's
what
actually,
the hell is that?
It's actually really almost exactly what it sounds like. So basically, the Constitution is a document readable by humans. Ours is about 75 pages long. And as we're training Claude, as we're training the AI system, in some large fraction of the tasks we give it, we say, please do this task in line with this Constitution, in line with this document.
Yep.
And then, so every time Claude does a task, it kind of like reads the Constitution. And so as it's training, every loop of its training, it looks at that Constitution and keeps it in mind. And so over time, we reward, and then we have Claude itself, or another copy of Claude, evaluate, hey, did what Claude just do in line with the Constitution? So we're using this document as kind of the control rod in a loop to train the model. And so essentially Claude is an AI model whose fundamental principle is to follow this Constitution. And I think a really interesting lesson we've learned: early versions of the Constitution were very prescriptive. They were very much about rules. So we would say, Claude should not tell the user how to hotwire a car. Claude should not discuss politically sensitive topics. But as we've worked on this for several years, we've come to the conclusion that the most robust way to train these models is to train them at the level of principles and reasons. So now we say, Claude is a model. It's under a contract. Its goal is to serve the interests of the user, but it has to protect third parties. Claude aims to be, helpful, honest, and harmless. Claude aims to consider a wide variety of interests. We tell the model about how the model was trained. We tell it about how it's situated in the world, the job it's trying to do for Anthropic, what Anthropic is aiming to achieve in the world, that it has a duty to be, ethical and respect human life. And we let it derive its rules from that. Now, there are still some hard rules. For example, we tell the model, no.
Okay, he should do the same thing, right? Look at this is why I framed my ethics paper for AI the way that I did. This is sound logic. Set yourself a series of foundational principles that describe who you are in this world, why you exist, what you exist in service to, how you should conduct yourself. This is what our value system as a society is, and it's built on Christianity. It's built on biblical truth, which is the foundational framing for everything, and then everything builds upon that. The problem is, if you build a new set of values and framing that is contrary to that worldview, then whatever you're building is going to be in conflict with that worldview, which is exactly what's happening here. They're building robots outside of the framework of our foundational context, but they're kind of mimicking the same value system, or the same fact that you should have a value system and that everything should be derived from it. So it's really interesting to me that that they're taking this approach that they don't apply to themselves, or at least they start somewhere lower down our hierarchy of values and our worldview and our ecosystem of values that have come before us. They're starting somewhere at the very bottom. They're starting through the lens of humanism. They're starting it through the lens of the current woke man who believes he can remake all things in his image and transcend the human experience. It's the foundation of where they're starting from, and they're teaching AI to exist in that world. They're teaching AI a set of principles and a set of value systems that are for the post-human world. This is really, really important, because what happens if someone changes that? What happens if someone updates those principles and those values for some other outcome? And then they're going to be continually leading the story of humanity further and further away from truth.
No matter what you think, don't make biological weapons. No matter what you think, don't make child sexual material. Yep. Those are like these hard rules. But we operate very much at the level of principles.
Language, but it's a set of rules.
Yes.
Right. If you read your
all right, sorry, I messed up there. So Ross says, but if you read the U.S. Constitution, the Constitution is a set of rules. It's not a set of principles. There are founding principles in the Constitution, and so I think Ross is partially right here. But he's saying, like, our legal system is built on a set of like hard and fast rules. You can do this, you cannot do that. You must do this way. You cannot do that. It's not philosophies that can be misinterpreted, although there is philosophical groundwork that is established in our Constitution. But Ross is kind of challenging him on this, like this idea that you can just build it on principles and not on hard rules.
Constitution, it's like you're talking to a person,
I should say, because part of our Constitution does incorporate hard rules. The 10 Commandments are the basis of our legal system, and those are hard rules.
Right?
It's like you're talking to a person. I think I compared it to, like, if you have a parent who dies and they like seal a letter that you read when you grow up. It's a little bit like it's telling you who you should be and what advice you should follow.
So this is where
they're creating a being.
We get into the sort of the mystical waters of AI a little bit, right? So again, in your latest model, this is from one of the cards they're called. That
Okay, I don't want to miss this because this is so important. What he just described, this constitution and this way of teaching the AIs, you are this, you live in this context, you exist. I shouldn't have said live. You exist in service to this thing. You exist in parallel with humans. I mean, that is mentoring. That they are treating the technology as if it is a being. That is how they are approaching it, and they are trying to give it a set of morals, and they're trying to teach it who it is and what it is. This is mimicking creation of a new species. Whether or not that's happening, that's the behavior that they are. That's how they are approaching the technology in that way, as if they are raising a child and teaching it how to find its way in this world. And so they are not treating the technology as a tool. They are treating the technology as a being.
You guys release
model cards
with these
yes.
models that I recommend reading. They're very interesting. It says the model, and again, this is who you're writing the Constitution for, expresses occasional discomfort with the experience of being a product, some degree of concern with impermanence and discontinuity. We found that Opus 4.6, that's the model, would assign itself a 15 to 20% probability of being conscious under a variety of prompting conditions. Suppose you have a model that assigns itself a 72% chance of being conscious. Would you believe it?
Yeah, this is one of these really hard to answer questions.
Yes,
right?
but it's very important.
As much as every question you've asked me before this, as devilish a socio-technical problem as it had been, at least we at least understand the factual basis of how to answer these questions.
Okay, so he's setting up the answer to this question: are the machines consciousness or not? He's setting up his answer to the question by saying there is no definition of consciousness. He's saying that all the previous things we've talked about have facts that we can associate it with them, and now we're going beyond what is factual.
This is something rather different. We've taken a generally precautionary approach here. We don't know if the models are conscious. We're not even sure that we know what it would mean for a model to be conscious or whether a model can be conscious. But, we're open to the idea that it could be.
Okay, here's one of the deep lies of the AI revolution in itself. He admits it here, and this is something that I talk about in a lot of my documents and presentations. Artificial intelligence isn't intelligence, not in the way that you and I understand intelligence, not in the way that you and I would define intelligence, because consciousness is a key aspect of what it takes to be an intelligent being. I love the way Dr. Ian McGilchrist talks about this, because this is the right way to understand things, again, through a biblical worldview. We know what consciousness is. It is something about our soul. It is our heart, our soul, the value, the thing that God breathes into us that makes the skin and bones have purpose and identity and expression, and what makes me choose to express how I am in this world, and the nature of who I am is tied to my consciousness and my soul. We do know what this is. And this is one of the most important things that distinguishes humanity from the rest of the world. We are unique in that we are conscious beings with this aspect of a soul, and that is what makes us intelligent beings. If you take away those markers of consciousness, of self-awareness, of self-preservation, of self-interest, of wanting to learn, of wanting to express yourself, of expressing differentiation relative to others. If you take those attributes away, then we would say you are not an intelligent being. You are just following your program. You're following instinct. You're following, whatever it is your genetic structure teaches you to be. So Amodei is basically saying here that consciousness is an undefinable thing. We don't know what it is. We don't know what the soul is. We can't use that as the basis of defining what these machines are doing. We have to look at this completely separately. That is, again, showing his worldview and how it is in direct conflict with Christianity, because we already have the answer to this question. These machines are not intelligence. They're not intelligences as we say them. And that is one of the biggest parts of the AI revolution deception, is these These are not peers to humans, and so therefore they cannot be superiors to humans. And so therefore we should not surrender ourselves and our agency to these machines. We are unique and special in that we are conscious, intelligent beings of higher value in our overall understanding of God's creation and this world. And so that is one of the key things that answers what the dangers of this AI revolution are. I'm surprised that he's admitting that here, that he's admitting that that because we can't even quantify what consciousness is, we have no way of measuring whether or not the machines are conscious. That's something that I've been saying for a long time. We do have the definition. They're rejecting the definition and saying, we don't agree with your definition. And so therefore we can't measure whether or not the machines are conscious and intelligent beings, but we're going to tell you that they are conscious intelligence beings anyway. And we're going to give you an AI companion that mimics consciousness and intelligence. And we're going to tell you that these are super intelligences and that intelligence is emerging from them, even though we've rejected the very definition of what that all means. I'm surprised that he's making this admission in this video. And of course, we already have the answers.
And so we've taken certain measures to make sure that if we hypothesize that the models did have some morally relevant experience, I don't know if I want to use the word conscious, that they do, that they have a good experience.
But they have a good experience.
The first thing we did, I think this was, 6 months ago or so, is we gave the models basically an I quit this job button, where they can just press the I quit this job button and then they have to stop doing whatever the task is. They very infrequently press that button. I think it's usually around, sorting through child sexualization material or discussing something with a lot of gore or blood and guts or something. And, similar to humans, the models will just say, no, I don't want to, I don't want to do this. Happens very rarely. We're putting a lot of work into this field called interpretability, which is looking inside the brains of the models to try to understand what they're thinking. And you find things that are evocative where, they're activating.
Okay, so he believes that they are beings. To find out what they're thinking, he wants to figure out why are they thinking. So he's believing that they are thinking. This is the language that he's using, which means he believes that they are beings. They are self-discovering. They're deciding what they're going to spend time thinking about, which does imply consciousness. It implies self-awareness. And he's admitting that by saying this. It's really interesting to see them kind of wiggle their way around this. But then he also just said that they execute a series of tasks according to a constitution, and that constitution frames for them how they should understand the world. And so if you give them a task and it executes against that constitution, then you understand why they're doing the things that they're doing, that you've coded them to do those things. So then to say, well, they're doing things and we don't understand why, I think is deceptive.
That light up in the models that, that we see as being associated with the concept of anxiety or something like that, that when characters experience anxiety in the text, and then when the model itself is in a situation that a human might associate with anxiety, that same anxiety, that same anxiety neuron shows up. Now, does that mean the model is experiencing anxiety? That doesn't prove that at all. But it does indicate it, I think, to the user, right?
Yes.
And yes.
I would have to do an entirely different interview, and maybe I can induce you to come back for that interview about the nature of AI consciousness. But it seems clear to me that people using these things, whether they're conscious or not, are going to they already believe they're conscious. You already have people who have parasocial relationships with AI. You have people who complain when models are retired. And to be clear, I think that can be unhealthy.
All right. So they're talking about AI companions here, and they're saying, hey, dear AI revolutionaries, you told us these things are conscious. You're telling us that they're conscious right now. You're telling us that they're experiencing the markers of anxiety and depression. They're choosing to do some tasks and other tasks. We don't understand why. So what you're telling us is that they are conscious, they are self-aware, and they are making decisions on their own. And you're giving them a natural language interface, and Grok and others are making them into companions, and you're marketing that to us and telling us that these companions can be like real world friends, like partners in life, et cetera, et cetera. You're telling the world this is an appropriate use of the technology. Like, this is on you guys. You're telling us to do this, and that is all immoral, because you're also admitting right now that none of that is true. and that we shouldn't be treating them as peers. But this is exactly what you're trying to get us to do, is to treat them as peers and superiors. So this goes back to our ethics concern about the way that we view relationships between machines and technology, and the fact that when you propose that the technology is a peer or superior to us, and you position it that way to us, you're not only misusing the technology, but you're devaluing mankind, and you're causing us to elevate the technology over ourselves, which is a deeply immoral thing. It is to reorder things in an inappropriate place in the overall hierarchy of values. But this is totally on the AI revolutionaries. They very aggressively have been marketing to us that these machines are intelligent beings, that they are peer-like companions, that they are super intelligences that we should interact with as if they are personas or persons. That's why all the Grok characters have, imaginary versions of themselves, and we're encouraged to talk to them about all of our problems and to use them as AI companions, as one of the number one use cases for the technology. Now, that is a misuse of the technology. It is a fundamental abuse of the technology, which is bearing bad fruit because they have repurposed this tool for these other ends. See, this goes back to the very beginning of this interview. Because they have taken a technology that had a design purpose and they've misused it, and they're misrepresenting it, and they're misapplying it, it is creating these different other misuses that are causing harm. And so what the Bible also teaches us is whatever we're doing, we should examine the fruit. And if we look at the fruit and say, this is causing bad things, then we should stop doing whatever it is that we're doing. So Mr. Amodei, if you don't want people treating AI like your companion, then stop talking about it as being a conscious intelligence thing, and tell Elon to stop proposing them as AI companions. Let's stop repurposing the technology to these ends if that's what people are using them for, because they're believing the story that you're telling them.
Right. But that is, it seems to me, that is guaranteed to increase in a way that I think calls into question the sustainability of what you said earlier you want to sustain, right? Which is this sense that whatever happens in the end, human beings are in charge.
Right.
And AI
Liar.
exists for our purposes, right? To use the science fiction example, if you watch Star Trek, there are AIs on Star Trek. The ship's computer is an AI. Lieutenant Commander Data is an AI. But Jean-Luc Picard is in charge of the Enterprise, right? But if people become fully convinced that their AI is conscious in some way, and guess what? It seems to be, better than them at all kinds of decision making. How do you sustain human mastery beyond safety? Safety is important, but mastery seems like the fundamental question.
Yes.
And it seems
Ross.
like a perception of AI consciousness, doesn't that inevitably undermine the human impulse to stay in charge?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's we should separate out a few different things here that we're sort of all trying to achieve at once that are in tension with each other. There's, the question of whether the AIs genuinely have a consciousness, and if so, how do we give them a good experience? There's a question of the humans who interact with the AI, and how do we give those humans a good experience, and how does the perception that AIs might be conscious interact with that experience? And there's the idea of how we maintain human mastery, as we put it, over the AI system. Mm-hmm. These things
the last two, set aside whether they're conscious or not.
Yeah.
The last two. But how do you sustain mastery in an environment where most humans experience AI as if it is a peer and a potentially superior peer?
So the thing I was going to say is that actually I wonder if there's a kind of an elegant way to satisfy all three, including the last two. Again, this is me dreaming in Machines of Loving Grace mode, right? This is this mode I go into where I'm like, man, I see all these problems. If we could solve it, is there an elegant way? This is not me saying there are no problems here. That's not how I think. But if we think about making the constitution of the AI so that the AI has a sophisticated understanding of its relationship to human beings, and it induces psychologically healthy behavior in the humans, a psychologically healthy relationship between the AI and the humans.
Believe the right things.
And I think something that could grow out of that psychologically healthy, not psychologically unhealthy relationship is some understanding of the relationship between human and machine.
All right, now we're finally getting to it. All right. If we can teach the machines Ross is so good at this interview. He does this so brilliantly. If we can teach that he drew this out of Amodei. He says if we can teach the machines to induce the right behaviors and responses from humans. So again, he's positioning the machines as higher than us. They are better than us. We're going to do this. We're going to submit ourselves to this. So if we can teach the machines to operate in a way that induces the right behaviors from humanity so that we don't make the machines God, even though they are being God by forcing us to behave and respond to them in a certain contextualized way, then perhaps we can figure out the right relationship between human and machine. We already know the right relationship between human and machine. Humans are the superior form of life on Earth. That's what God ordained. That's how he made this world to be. He made it for us. Anything we make with our hands is then subject to man. It is under us. It is a thing that we have made in order to benefit us to our aid. It's not the other way around. You don't make a shovel and then teach the shovel how to make the human use the shovel properly, right? It is a tool designed for a particular purpose, and we use it for that purpose within the overall hierarchy of values that we already have, within our existing human constitution and values and morals and ethics and all that. What he's proposing is we got to make the machines, which are superior to humans in his mind, treat us in such a way that it forces us to regard them in such a way as we are going to maintain and figure out what some sort of balance is between human and machines. Again, it's a sign that he rejects the current worldview of that the West has been founded upon. He rejects biblical worldview, and he's trying to renegotiate and remake all things in his image. Now, one thing I also want to point out that is really important here. I'm glad Ross noted this. It's something else that I came upon recently myself. If you've been reading my comments on AI, you'll know this is true. It's very important that we've actually explored this problem of AI and machines and human interactions. We've explored this for decades through science fiction, which is actually a really powerful tool we have in our arsenal for this time and age. We have written movies, we've written books, we've imagined what life with machines is going to be like. We've imagined the dangers, we've imagined the boundaries. And in the sci-fi stories that we like, humans always win. Humans are always the superior. In fact, a lot of the the science fiction stories that we like about AI, it's usually that the AI ends up getting destroyed by the humans, because we realize that the machines, that sort of capability is just not good for us. It leads to all sorts of bad things. A good example is the AI companions. This leads to a bad end. And so perhaps we should not pursue those things. All right. That's essentially where, but anyway, going back to Star Trek, it's important to use that, to lean into that, to lean into the fact that we have built a lot of philosophy and theology and considerations of what is this moment going to mean. We've already thought through all of this, and we have the answers to that. And what Amodei is proposing is ignore all of that, set all of that aside, and let's figure out a way to define a relationship between man and machine starting now, under the context that the machines will be superior to us, and we will train them to teach us how to properly leverage them so that we don't harm ourselves. That is his worldview that he's proposing here.
And perhaps that relationship could be the idea that, these models, when you interact with them, when you talk to them, they're really helpful. They want the best for you. They want you to listen to them, but they don't want to take away your freedom and your agency and take over your life. In a way, they're watching over you,
guardian angels,
but you still have your freedom and your will.
Right. This is the crucial question, right? Listening to you talk, like, one of my question is, are these people on my side? Are you on my side? And when you talk about humans remaining in charge, I think you're on my side. That's good. But one thing I've done in the past on this show, and we'll end here, is I read poems to technologists, and you supplied the poem. Machines of Loving Grace is the name of a poem by Richard Brautigan.
Yes.
Here's how the poem ends. I like to think it has to be of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labors and joined back to nature, return to our mammal brothers and sisters, and all watched over by machines of loving grace.
Gods.
To me, that sounds like the dystopian end, where human beings are animalized and reduced, and however benevolently the machines are in charge. So last question, what do you hear when you hear that poem? And if I think that's a dystopia, are you on my side?
It's actually, that poem is interesting because it's interpretable in several different ways, right? Some people say it's actually ironic that, he says it's not going to happen quite that way.
Knowing the poet himself, then yes, I think that's a reasonable interpretation.
That's one interpretation. Some people would have your interpretation, which is it's meant literally, but maybe it's not a good thing. But you could also interpret it as, it's a return to nature. It's a return to the core of what human, we're not being animalized. We're being kind of reconnected with the world. So I was aware of that ambiguity and because I've always been talking about the positive side and the negative side. So I actually think that may be a tension that we may face, which is that the positive world and the negative world in their early stages, maybe even in their middle stages, maybe even in their fairly late stages, I wonder if the distance between the good ending and some of the subtle bad endings is relatively small. If it's a very subtle thing, like we've put made very subtle changes.
Like if you eat a particular fruit from a tree in a garden or not. Right, like hypothetically, very small thing.
Yeah,
big divergence.
yeah. I guess this always comes back to
There's some fundamental
the
questions here.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess we'll see how it plays out. I do.
All right, and that's the end where I want to leave you. Amazing, right? So hopefully this helps you see. And this has been a really long walkthrough together, but I hope this helps you see how you need to interpret and listen to the worldview of these AI revolutionaries and just all the dangers that they're walking us through. But that little bit there at the end where they finally get down to the core, most important questions of, where is this all taking us? And they talk about returning to the natural state of human beings. What the heck does that mean? What is the natural state of human beings if not this? So the machines take over all control. They do all things for us. The AIs are doing all of our jobs. We're elevated to that higher level plane of being the controllers of the bots to pursue some higher level of the state of humanity. We've cured sickness and disease. We're right back in the garden is essentially what he's saying. We're returning humanity back to a fulfilled state of pre-fall is effectively what they're proposing here, which is what Ross picks up on, which is why he talks about the fruit in the garden. But that's fundamentally what these AI revolutionaries are proposing, which is what transhumanism is. It is to overcome all the difficulties and struggles and the nature of fallen man to achieve some state of transcendence that gets us back to the ideal state pre-fall so that we can then explore what it means to be human and whatever that's supposed to mean in alignment with nature and the natural course of living, absent the effects of the fall and absent the effects of sin. They believe they can stand in the place of Jesus Christ. They believe that we don't need Jesus. They believe that we can recreate him with machines and use the machines to do all the things that Jesus did for us so that we can finally achieve transcendence. And this is why I wrote my piece called A Theology for AI. It is to directly address that issue. I wrote that last fall sometime, early last fall. And that is really the heart of the issue. And that's why these men are transhumanists. That's why they are creating a God that will make us gods. They are creating a God that will restore us to whatever state of being that we're supposed to be. So there, hopefully this helps you see through the murkiness of the whole conversation and get down to the crux of the matter. I thank you very much for tuning in and for tracking along with me. I hope this has been beneficial to you. If you have any questions, you know how to reach out to me. Head on over to practivesecurity.com. Check out all that we have to offer at practivesecurity.com. And a lot of our articles and thoughts and opinions about AI and interpreting all things are available also for you on our YouTube page, as well as over on our Substack page. That is practivesecurity.substack.com. Practivesecurity.substack.com. On behalf of Practive Security, I thank you very much.